Hey, ladies and gentlemen, let's continue where we left off. We were talking about the different roles the president plays, and so we're just going to pick up from there. We talked about how the president, by the Constitution, is the chief executive, and it is his job to carry out the federal laws. Now, we understand that, again, one person can't possibly do that entirely by themselves. And so what has developed over the years is this massive conglomeration of different agencies and commissions and boards and regulatory type groups that actually assist the president in carrying out the federal law. One way he does this is through executive orders, and we went through these yesterday. Every president does them. It is not something that is evil to one president or another. A lot of times new presidents will come in and they will change the direction of a particular law by an executive order in which a former president had taken it. That's not uncommon. But when we talk about the president directing federal agencies, we spent time a little bit talking about who specifically is he directing. And primarily the first one that we covered yesterday was the Executive Office of the President. And we went through the White House office, the National Security Council, the Council of Economic Advisors, and the Office of Management and Budget. That's not the only area that he is directing. He also has his 15 presidential cabinets. And within those cabinets, it breaks down into subsections, which some of you are going to take a peek at. All of you are going to take a peek at when we do the agency PowerPoint. As of yesterday, there were 441 agencies. That number will fluctuate from president to president. I think with the next administration, we're going to see that number go down. And keeping in mind that not all the jobs can automatically go away. What sometimes happens when presidents try to downsize the federal government is it isn't the federal government. Well, how do I put this? The federal government may cut back on their responsibility on certain policy issues. However, those policy issues still need to be covered. And so they actually go to the state governments, and the state governments actually take on more responsibility, which causes the state governments to get larger while the federal government is getting smaller. So we could see some of that take place in the next administration. We also talked about the independent agencies, independent regulatory commissions, and the government corporations. So here is a picture. It's not clear because they're trying to get a lot of information in one slide, but we see the Constitution as the supreme law of the United States. And the Constitution is what gives Congress, the president, and the courts their power. But when we look at what the executive branch's job is to execute the law, how does he do that? He needs all these cabinets to help him. And in addition to the connection of those are all these different boards, foundations, commissions, services, administrations that are responsible then to help the president carry out that federal law. Next hat the president wears is that of the chief legislator. Now, we have covered in quite depth that Congress is the only one that actually has the power to make laws. As part of separation of powers, the framers set it up that Congress makes the laws, and it is the president who then carries out and enforces those laws. But the president does actually have quite a bit of power over what laws come out of Congress. A lot of people will actually say he is the main architect of U.S. policy, where the power he has over legislation, even though he can't make the law, he still has a substantial amount of power over what actually Congress and the direction Congress takes. So what are some of those ways the Constitution gives the president power? Is simply by something we've already covered, the ability to sign a bill into law or to veto a bill. And that includes a pocket veto. So that is directly identified in Article 1, Section 7, that the president has that power. Another thing that's in the Constitution that the president has the ability to influence and try to persuade Congress a certain direction is the State of the Union address. Now, what the Constitution says about the State of the Union is that from time to time, he will give to Congress a state of our country, where our country is. He is responsible for the country. Therefore, it only makes sense that he has the ability and a responsibility to look at Congress and say, from my perspective, this is where I see the country at this point. Presidents have sent letters to Congress. They have gotten up in front of Congress. Now the State of the Union is actually broadcast. And so we, as Americans, can sit and watch what the president says and get an idea of what he thinks about the next calendar year. So he does this on an annual basis. That has become tradition, where he will tell Congress, this is what I think we should do. Now, a very popular president is very likely to get Congress to take more notice. A weak president, Congress just goes through the motions, and sometimes we see members of Congress not even show up. But I like to think of the State of the Union, and I think sometimes it helps students think of the State of the Union better, and I'd like you to write this down, is that the State of the Union is kind of like a Dear Santa letter. Dear Santa, this is what I want this year for Christmas. I think we've done a good job. That's what he's doing. He's saying, but instead of saying Dear Santa, he's literally saying Congress, this is what I think we need to do in the next legislative session. I think we need to address issues of taxes. We need to address issues of national security. This is where we're at currently. And so popular presidents will then get quite a bit of influence over legislators in what they say in that particular address. The next thing that helps the president act as the chief legislator is this power of executive privilege. Now, a definition of executive privilege is the president having the power to withhold information from Congress that he believes is exclusive to the executive branch, which sometimes when Congress is in their oversight responsibility of making sure the president and his agencies and his cabinets are all doing their jobs, they may have an investigation, or they may be looking into how money was spent. But presidents are able to say, I'm not providing you that information. I'm not having someone from my administration testify in front of a congressional hearing. I'm invoking what's called executive privilege. Now, a couple of executive privileges I'd like you to get into your notes. One particular use of executive privilege was President Nixon. When Congress was starting to inquire about Nixon's role in the Watergate scandal, they were doing a congressional investigation, and it became evident to them that there were potentially audio tapes that were recorded in Nixon's office while he was president, or as he was president, and those recordings would actually shed some light on whether or not he was or had knowledge of the Watergate break-in. And so when the congressional committee subpoenaed or legally requested that those tapes be handed over to that investigation committee, President Nixon invoked executive privilege and said, those tapes are privileged because they were conversations that I had as the chief executive. They have nothing to do with congressional responsibility. So he actually invoked this privilege. Congress wasn't playing the game, and so they actually took it to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court, knowing that Nixon was going to use those tapes in his presidential library at some point, actually said, no, you can't withhold these tapes. So he was forced to turn over the tapes. ironically, the tapes got turned over and there was a portion of discussion, which is probably where they were discussing the knowledge of this event. It went blank. So oddly, that happened. The other time that we've seen the executive privilege used recently was with Bill Clinton. When Bill Clinton was being investigated by Congress in the potential impeachment of him, they had actually asked him to speak with members of his Secret Service, and Bill Clinton denied it. And he said the Secret Service has a responsibility to protect me, and what they see and what they hear while they're doing their job is privileged information. The Supreme Court didn't actually go with that either. They actually struck him down. Former President Trump also used executive privilege in a number of cases. And he tried to use executive privilege when it came to the files that were being held at Mar-a-Lago. But presidents use this. Some presidents are successful in it. Some presidents are not. How does that shape the political agenda or influence Congress? It provides Congress or it denies Congress information they feel is necessary to do their jobs. All right, third power of the president is his role as commander-in-chief. Okay, this is written in the Constitution. He is the commander-in-chief, but the framers were very specific in this. They wanted a chief executive who was not active military. Okay, we've had presidents who were military. I mean, General Eisenhower, General Washington, just tooting off the top of our heads. They were in the military, but when they became president of the United States, they actually had to retire from the military and become a civilian. Okay, the framers wanted our government to be based and run by civilians that controlled the military rather than the military controlling the government. So they were truly looking ahead, that they didn't want a military-led type government. Good or not good, that's truly up to each individual to decide. But to be president of the United States, there is no requirement for them to personally have had military service. So we have many presidents who have served, who have never served in the military realm any way, shape, or form. They've never been in combat. They don't know what it is to put on the uniform. They don't know necessarily the full structure of the military. There's nothing that requires an individual to have military experience. And the framers didn't think that was necessary. I mean, they knew who the first president would be. I mean, I think they knew that Washington would be first, and he had military experience. But I don't think they thought that was a necessary prereq to hold the position. As the commander-in-chief, the president is the highest ranking military official. He's the boss of the military. He outranks our top generals. He outranks every position that is in our military because he is the commander-in-chief. He runs, he decides, he makes the decisions for the U.S. military, what they're going to do, where they're going to be. We have cases where presidents have sent troops into situations without declarations of war. There's a procedure, there's legislation that restricts the president from just willy-nilly sending soldiers all over the place. But he ultimately controls our U.S. military. Same as what I've just said, he's the boss. I have a former student who was in the military, and he made it very clear that he was in the military during the Obama administration. He didn't like Obama as a person, as a politician, as a president, but when it came to him recognizing Obama as the commander-in-chief, he said, that is my boss, and I have a responsibility to listen to him. like I've said already, he decides where troops shall be stationed, where ships get sent, how weapons will be used. I mean, he ultimately runs the show. Back up. He also gives the orders. That's one of the reasons why former President Trump wants to prosecute General Milley, was because General Milley, even though he was a subordinate to the president while Trump was in office, General Milley took it upon himself to talk with the Chinese and reiterate to them there is no threat that you are going to be attacked. And then saying to people at the Pentagon, if the president starts acting in a way that looks like he is going to start some action in China, General Milley says, I want to be informed of that before any action is taken. So every day the president gets a update, security briefing that includes where the military is located. Are there any military actions that need to take place? And as we discussed when we did Article 1, Section 8, the president does have the ability to call up the National Guard. There are situations in which presidents have. We've had National Guard serve in combat. We have National Guard right now at the border, the southern border of the United States, acting as under the direction of the president in protecting and slowing down or stopping immigration movement into the United States. So this is a really big job. I see the football here. I would ask at this point that the sub stop this video and actually play the second video I have linked on what exactly is the president's football. So I'm going to pause here for a second and let the sub stop the video and then show the video of what the president's football is and why that is so important, and then restart the video here in a second. Well, I hope that all made sense. So we'll move forward from there. All right. The next power of the president is the president as the chief of state. Okay. Now, I want you to make sure before we go into this, I want you to put the definition behind state in your notes. Remember, state is defined as an independent political unit. Okay, when we talked about state, and we've talked about it several times through this class, state is a synonymous term. It could mean a kingdom, it could be in a nation, it could be in a country. It is the chief of the United States, and he's going to play another role as diplomat, but as chief of state, he is the top symbol of our country. Okay, when a dignitary or an ambassador or a diplomat or a foreign leader comes into the United States, the president, when meeting with them, he is acting as the chief of state. He is the head of state. He is the head of our country. So he plays a very ceremonial role. Oftentimes, presidents will hold big, what they call state dinners. State dinners are a big event welcoming a foreign leader into the country and recognizing diplomatic relationships between the United States and foreign countries. He's an entertainer. The picture in the background that you see is President Biden with his wife, and I believe that is the leader of Japan. He gets to entertain when there are foreign dignitary in the country. So one of the things I would like you to remember is a chief of state. He's wearing this hat and playing this role when foreign leaders come into the country, rather than the next one when he leaves the country. So chief of state is when he's in the country. Chief diplomat is dealing with how the United States is perceived and how the United States is recognized outside the country. So what roles and what constitutional responsibilities does a president have is in nominating diplomats and ambassadors moving forward. Just recently, the senator from Wisconsin was chosen to be the ambassador to, it's going to escape me right now, but presidents get to shift out who they want representing the United States, working with the foreign government. And oftentimes they're working with the foreign government in that foreign country. So as chief diplomat, the president gets the power to then influence the foreign policy through these individuals. They can do that through the formation of treaties. Okay, we've already talked about treaties in this class. That is an agreement between the United States and a foreign country. Sometimes we see treaties that settle wars. Oftentimes we see treaties that are dealing with trade issues. But we know that treaties are not something the president can do single-handedly. He will need the approval and ratification of the Senate for that treaty to be recognized by the United States and go into effect. There is another way around that, and that is called executive agreements. Executive agreements are agreements presidents make with foreign countries. They are like treaties, but what's different about an executive agreement is that executive agreements do not require Senate ratification. So I would ask the question then, why would presidents not go with more executive agreements and instead go with more executive agreements and get rid of treaties altogether? Keeping in mind the president doesn't control the purse strings. So if he enters into all these executive agreements without any acknowledgement by the U.S. Senate or request of their opinions, they could actually start the reverse and start holding him accountable by denying funding to carry out some of these treaties. So it sounds like, why wouldn't you go that route for everything? We know that that's not possible because the Senate has a major role in this, and the president needs to have his programs, his policy directives all funded, and without Congress, he's got nothing. All right, next one is the president is the chief of the party. Okay, this is literally because he is the head of the party right now. He may help others get elected. There are times where presidents want to go and help somebody running for a member of Congress, a House member or Senate member. And if they're popular, they can go out and they can truly get people to back behind a president. Presidents who are unpopular may be told by people who are running for office they don't want their support because they want to distance themselves from an unpopular president. They're going to campaign for members who have supported his policies. Okay, we see that. We see that with presidents when somebody is them and has actually worked in Congress or has worked at the state level to do something that the president supports or wants to be policy, that he will actually put more effort into seeing them get elected rather than, or re-elected, I should say, than those who may not have been as loyal. Help push the party platform. Every 4 years at the the national conventions, the nominating conventions, one of the things they do is they redo their platform. A platform is essentially the party's wish list for the next 4 years, where the president does a State of the Union, and that's his wish list for the next year. A party platform is the party's wish for what they want to see happen at the federal government in the next 4 years. So a popular president is going to be able to push his party's platform, their desires, their wishes for policy, when he's in office. So he's playing a lot of roles, and he has a lot of responsibility when it comes to representing his party. The Democratic Party right now is in a little bit of trouble because they have kind of lost steam into what they stand for. And can responsibility be put on the president? Well, he is the head of that party. And so there's a lot of discussion of how the Democrats now reboot themselves and start going back to policy areas and really start getting themselves motivated behind a couple of policy areas that are important to the public. All right. As I said yesterday, I said he's not necessarily the chief economist. Nonetheless, this will say the chief economist, but he is more the guardian of the economy. Any president is going to be concerned with the U.S. economy because many people in the United States, I would say most people in the United States, thinks that the president has a direct impact on whatever is going on with our economy. So when it comes to unemployment, when it comes to inflation, when it comes to taxes, when it comes to the success or failure of businesses, a president is going to be concerned with that. They may not have any literal direct hands-on ability to control any of it, but Americans are going to look and they're going to say, this is actually the fault or the failure of a president or the success of a president. As I've said before, he does not control the economy. He actually, the expectation is that it is under his administration that ups and downs in our economic prosperity reflect on the success and failure of a particular president. So when I said, and I've repeatedly said, the president doesn't set interest rates, the president doesn't determine inflation rates, he certainly doesn't determine tax rates because, again, Congress has to create the tax law before he can sign or reject it, and he does not set gas prices. So presidents, do they have direct influence over the finances of the United States? Even when we talk about Federal Reserve Board chairmen, not every president gets to appoint someone to that position because they hold staggered terms. So they may hold, I think they hold a 10 or a 12-year term. So once their term is up, then whoever's in office would get an ability to have a say over who's going to replace or continue in that position. And they have way more control over the economy than the president directly does himself. All right. And the final one, the final hat the president wears is that of judicial leader. Okay. Our courts and the way that the Constitution is written is the president has a responsibility to our judicial branch, and he has a major responsibility in that he is the only one that can nominate federal judges. We know that the Senate has to approve those nominations, but a nomination can't be approved if the president doesn't make it. The other thing is the president has the ability to grant pardons and reprieves. Pardons we've already seen. We've talked extensively about pardons. Reprieves is just taking a sentence and dropping it down. So somebody who's on death row and a president grants a reprieve, it would take that reprieve and make it life in prison, for example. The only thing the Constitution doesn't allow is that he can't grant a pardon or a reprieve in the case of an impeachment. So if a justice was impeached, he can't actually say, you know what, I'm gonna grant you a pardon, and that impeachment doesn't exist. So when it comes to commuting a sentence, again, that's bringing a sentence down. That's even maybe eliminating a sentence, saying somebody who's been in prison actually gets to go free. And grant amnesty. Amnesty is giving somebody protection. And so when we look at all these powers of the president, It is one single person. This is one person who is being expected to play the role of all these different positions. And again, it is one person. So we can't really realistically expect a single individual. That's where the bureaucracy